Have you ever been in bed with someone and thought, why does this feel so easy? Not easy in the sense of boring, but easy in the sense of present, connected, like you're actually there with them, not performing, not managing, not waiting for something to go wrong. That feeling has a name, and it's not luck. It's not chemistry. It's not even compatibility, at least not in the way that most people mean. It's secure attachment. And today I want to show you what it looks like in a sexual context and why it makes such a difference. Hi, I'm Cyndi Darnell, a sex and relationship therapist and coach, working with all kinds of people and all kinds of relationship configurations all over the world. On this channel, I talk about sex, desire, intimacy, and relationships, honestly, practically, and without shame. If you're new here, welcome. And if you've been here a while, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. If anything I share today resonates with you, please hit subscribe and the notification bell. I have a lot more coming this year and I don't want you to miss any of it. So, what is secure attachment and what is attachment theory? Attachment theory was developed by British psychologist John Bowlby in the 1960s and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth. It began as a way of understanding how infants bond with their caregivers. But what's understood is that those early patterns don't just stay in childhood. The thinking is that they tend to follow us into adulthood, our friendships, our relationships, and even into our beds. There are four main patterns this framework describes: secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. And this series of videos will cover all four and how they relate to sex. So let's talk about what attachment theory is and what it isn't. Before we get into the specifics, I want to say something that I think is really important and that a lot of content about attachment styles leaves out entirely. And it's this: attachment theory is exactly that. It's a theory, it's a framework. It's a lens that was developed by researchers observing patterns in how humans relate. And it's genuinely useful as a template for understanding, for clinicians, for couples, and anyone trying to make sense of their own relational history. But it's not settled, proven science. It has its critics, it has its limitations, and the research is still evolving, and just like all psychological frameworks, it reflects a cultural and historical context that it emerged from. So don't hear anything I say, and especially not this series, as a diagnosis. These categories are not boxes to put yourself in. They're descriptions, useful descriptions, sometimes uncomfortably accurate descriptions of patterns, descriptions of behavior that many of us recognize in ourselves. And here's what I think matters most. Every attachment pattern develops for a reason. It wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a character flaw that just arrived out of nowhere. It's a response, a deeply logical, often viscerally intelligent response to the emotional environment you were raised in. So think of it this way. There's a version of you that is your self, your natural capacity for curiosity, for connection, for pleasure, and for trust. And then there's an adapted self, a version of you that learned early on to modify those natural impulses in order to stay safe, to stay close, and to stay loved. And the adapted self isn't broken. It did exactly what it needed to do. It protected you. But the question we're exploring in this series is not what's wrong with you. It's what did you learn, and is it still serving you? The other thing I want to say clearly is that these attachment patterns are not fixed. They're not your identity. Many people find their patterns look quite different in relationships or shift significantly across time. This can be also true depending on the people that you're in relationships with. Different parts of you might emerge in different relationships in different contexts. Someone deeply anxious in one relationship may feel far more settled in another, or someone who learnt to shut down emotionally can, with the right support and experiences, find that capacity for closeness genuinely opening up. There's no superior style. Secure might feel more comfortable for you and the people around you, but it isn't necessarily a gold standard and everyone else is failing to reach it. It's simply a description of what low anxiety tends to look like. Every other pattern has its own purpose and its own intelligence, its own history and its own logic. There's no shame in any of them. So what this series offers is not a verdict, but a way of seeing. So if you see something in your experience of sex and intimacy that isn't working for you, you have a place to start understanding why. And with that context in mind, let's look at what the secure pattern actually describes. Secure attachment refers to a way of relating where someone has internalized on a body level, so not just intellectually, that they are worthy of love, that other people are generally trustworthy, and that intimacy doesn't require them to abandon themselves in order to maintain it. So in developmental terms, this usually means someone whose early caregiving was consistent enough that their adapted self and their core self didn't have to drift too far apart. They didn't have to become radically different in order to be loved. So they arrived in adulthood with their own needs and instincts relatively intact. So for example, you can feel close without feeling consumed. You can be independent without being distant. And when things go wrong, as they always do, you can trust that the relationship will survive it. I'm starting the series here, not because secure is the correct way to be, nor is it necessarily aspirational, but because it helps us to understand what low anxiety intimacy can feel like before we explore the other patterns that can sometimes make it harder. So what does this actually look like sexually? People with predominantly secure patterns around sex might tend to approach sex with an openness and an easiness that is unusual in our culture. And it's not because they don't have preferences or fears, absolutely they do, but because their sense of worth isn't on the line every time they take their clothes off. Perhaps they can ask for what they want without it feeling like an enormous risk. Or they can hear a, not now or not tonight, without it meaning rejection. They can say things like, I'd love more of that. Or, when you did it like this, it wasn't so great. What I'd really prefer is that, without a week of anxiety about how it landed for the other person. They can be vulnerable, really vulnerable, not just physically, but emotionally. They can let someone see them, their desire, their body, their need for closeness, without immediately needing to armor up afterwards. And that vulnerability, it turns out, is where some of our deepest pleasure lives. Research consistently shows that people who feel secure around sexuality report higher levels of satisfaction, not because they're having more adventurous sex, but because they're more present for it. They're not spending half the experience spectatoring, meaning watching themselves as if they were an outsider, or monitoring their partner's reactions, or managing their own anxiety, or already half checked out. They're present. They're in the room, they're in their body, and they're in the moment. One of the clearest signs of secure sexuality is the ability to talk about sex before, during, and after, without it being a minefield. And this isn't because these people are fearless. It's because they've internalized over time that their relationship to themselves and their sexuality is robust enough to handle the honesty, and even that their partner won't crumble, and neither will they, if something real gets said. They might say, I've been feeling a bit disconnected lately, can we talk about it? Or they might say, that felt amazing. Or they might say, I'm not sure that's working for me anymore, can we try something else? Or, I've been wanting to try something, but I feel a little bit nervous bringing it up. And critically, they can also tolerate hearing those things from a partner without spiraling, because their nervous system isn't on high alert every time a conversation gets real. So secure sexuality doesn't mean that everything is perfect. It means the relationship is a safe enough place to work through these differences together. I want to share a story with you about Sarah and Denise. They came to see me, not because something was dramatically wrong, but because something had quietly faded. The sex had become infrequent and a little bit routine. Not bad, but just not alive. They both wanted more, but neither quite knew how to say it without implying that the other had failed. And what struck me about Sarah and Denise was how they were with each other in almost every other area of life. They co-parented beautifully. They navigated money disagreements without it becoming a war. They had a genuine friendship underneath the partnership, underneath the relationship. But around desire and pleasure and asking for what they actually wanted, there was a kind of like a held breath. It's almost like the rules of the relationship had changed when it came to sex, because this was the one area that felt a bit more dangerous than the rest. And it almost always is for people, because sex carries so much. There's history, there's vulnerability, there's ego, there's identity. Even in otherwise secure and established relationships, it can become a zone of careful management. I often say to my clients that sex is the place emotions go to get processed, even if they have nothing to do with sex actually at the outset. It's the place that unresolved emotions go to get seen, to get validated, and to get processed. So what Sarah and Denise needed wasn't a technique so much. They needed permission, and they needed a framework to bring the same security they had everywhere else into the bedroom. Over several sessions, they started having conversations they'd been quietly avoiding for years. So things like what they actually wanted, and they had to have these conversations with themselves first. What had changed, what they missed, and what they'd been afraid to ask for because it felt selfish or too much or too revealing. And when they were brave enough to speak at that level, they discovered that the relationship was stronger than their fear of the honesty. It always had been. Their sex life didn't transform overnight, but it began to feel like something they were creating together rather than something that was happening to them. They became more active participants in their own sex life. Just a quick pause here. If you're finding this useful, a like really does help this content reach more people who need it. And if you want to go further with any of this, head on over to my website, cyndidarnell.com. I have online courses there that go deep into understanding your body, your desire, and your relationships. And I want to remind you about the next video in this series about anxious attachment and sexuality, which connects directly with what we're covering today. I'll link it at the end and put it in the description below. So, can attachment patterns shift? This is one of the questions I get most often when we talk about this. And it's important to recognize that securely attached people in a relational context are not always necessarily securely attached sexually. Learning to be secure around sexuality is a distinct but complementary skill set. So being able to be robust enough to speak your truth and hear the truth of another person is critical in developing and creating secure attachment in a relational sense. And those skills also translate to being able to talk securely about sexuality. But just because somebody is good at talking about emotion doesn't necessarily mean that they're good at talking about sexuality, because sexuality can bring up levels of vulnerability that other emotional processing work doesn't always meet, because there seems to be something about talking about sex that can make even secure people feel a little bit insecure, to feel a little bit anxious. But the reality is, for anybody of any attachment persuasion, is that the patterns formed early on, yes, they can be very sticky, but they're not impossible to shift. And they don't shift from willpower alone. They do shift through new experiences, specifically through the repeated embodied experience of being in connection with yourself and with others, where it feels safe enough to slowly update what the nervous system used to believe was true. This is a type of earned security, the process of moving towards more settled, trusting patterns through education, through therapy, through consistently safe conversations or relationships, and through growing awareness of your own history and your own sexuality. It's not a destination that you arrive at or miss. It's more like a journey, an orientation of travel. And it's also worth saying again that many people find their patterns can look quite different with different partners or at different points in their life. What developed in one relationship isn't necessarily what shows up in the next. And that's not inconsistency. It is a response to the environment around us, which is also critically important when it comes to understanding sex and sexuality. And it helps us understand that these patterns were never actually a fixed part of who we are. We can change them. The next 3 episodes look at the relationship of anxious, avoidant, and disorganized patterns with sexuality, not to pathologize them, but to understand them. Because the more we understand about ourselves and our sexuality and each other, the more we can work with them and work towards expressing and developing ourselves. So, secure sexuality isn't a destination that only lucky people reach. It's a pattern, it's a practice. It's one that can shift and grow and deepen at any stage of life. And importantly, it isn't a permanent state, even for people who generally experience it. It waxes and wanes depending on who we're with, what we've been through, and how much support we have. I hope what this video gives you is less a standard to live up to and more a sense of what low anxiety intimacy can feel like. That if your experience of sex and closeness has felt harder than this, at least you have a language for that now. And if this video series is the beginning of something for you, a new way of understanding yourself or your relationship, I'm really glad you're here. The next episode, like I said, is about anxious attachment and sex, and if you've ever found yourself craving reassurance after intimacy, and frankly, who hasn't, or feeling more unsettled after sex than before, then this one is definitely for you. If you want to go deeper with any of this, I have 2 places to point you. My book, Sex When You Don't Feel Like It, The Truth About Mismatched Libido and Rediscovering Desire, is available now. The link is below in the description. And if you're ready to do the work, head on over to cyndidarnell.com. I have online courses there that go deep into understanding your body, your relationships, your desire, wherever you're starting from. You might also like to work with me in a coaching or counseling capacity. I work with clients all over the world. All that information is on cyndidarnell.com too. If this has been useful, please like this video. It genuinely helps more people find it. And subscribe if you haven't already. I have a lot more information coming for you this year. Please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, take care of your bodies. They're doing their best.